welcome back to deck building. I am your host, Demo, and we got more Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers coming out. First impressions, let's take a look at some new cards. Starting out with Pacle. Okay, first among equals, 2 and a blue. Human Advisor 1/5 at the beginning of each player's end step. If an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. That's actually really good. So obviously this is at the beginning of each player's end step. So you're essentially, I mean, you're not really surveilling, but very similar. You're essentially surveil too, but you're putting one in your hand. Actually, it's way better than surveil. I mean, if you just look at this as, look at the top 2 cards of your library, you get to put one in your hand. That's fantastic. The fact that one goes to your graveyard is you can build around that, or you can just say, I'm putting a card in my hand every turn, right? And of course, you can do that by having an artifact enter the battlefield under every turn. So on your opponent's turn, on your turn. On your turn, obviously, super easy. Just play a mana rock or something, right? Having an artifact enter the battlefield under an opponent's control is a little bit more difficult. You could just do the artifact stuff, cast artifacts with flash. That would be the easiest way. Have that Shimmer Mirror in there, or any artifact that has flash. There's a bunch. It would be totally worth it to do that, in my opinion, because I cast that artifact on their turn. I mean, it's going to do something. It's going to give me some, it might not be great, but it might give me some value. And then on that end step, now I look at the top 2 cards of my library and I get to put, so I'm at the very least, I'm replacing the card I just cast, so it can do the artifact tribal theme here, right? But also I can just have an artifact token enter the battlefield as well. Like a Smothering Tithe would work great here if there was a blue one. Of course, there's not, because your opponents don't pay the 2. You get the treasure token. Now you've triggered your commander. That would be an absolute phenomenal combo here, those 2 cards. So, I mean, obviously this is going to go in the 99 of a lot of decks for sure. Any treasure token deck in blue this would be great. Clue token. Oh man, like here we go again, right? My Denic deck is very often making clue tokens on my opponent's turn. And if I do that, I will be able to look at the top 2 cards, and I can even put one in my graveyard, which again, in that deck is actually, you know, there are some advantages there. It's a little bit of a graveyard deck. Man, this guy's actually a pretty good fit in my Denic deck. So again, there's a deck where you probably wouldn't even think of a guy like this to fit in a deck like that, but it's actually a great fit because I am making artifact tokens on my opponent's turn very frequently, right? If you have any deck like that, right, you're making those food tokens. In blue, maybe not so much. I don't know. Again, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but if you have a blue deck that is making artifact tokens, possibly on other people's turns, you're going to get this trigger a lot. And this is fantastic value. Again, I love those triggers that just happen on every end step. That's why I like my Denic deck so much. All I have to do is just make sure this thing happens, and I'm getting this nice free value out of it. Look at the top 2 cards. Again, at the very least, this is essentially I draw a card, right? The fact that the other one's going to my graveyard, maybe I want to build around that. Maybe I don't. Maybe I put a Pedantic Learning in this. In fact, that would probably be an auto include for this, because you could just very easily, you know, you don't need any lands. You just throw it in your graveyard and that will trigger your Pedantic Learning, which will then, you can pay 1 and draw another card, right? So that's a great fit there as well. I always like to find places for neat cards like that. As a commander, I think it's pretty good. This is a pretty good commander, and you might be able to figure out some really great cards that are like triggering and making tokens on your opponent's turns, because that's where you want this to trigger on every turn. But also this guy's going to go in the 99 of a lot of decks too as well. All right, let's talk about the Ancient One. Blue and a black, Spirit God 8/8. That is a big boy for 2 mana. I suspect there's going to be some drawbacks here. Again, though, I will just say we have a god that, you know, I don't think it has Indestructible. Doesn't look like it does. Tyrite Sanctum. There's looks like there's going to be a few gods in this set. Grab your copy now. That card's probably going to go up in price a little bit, because it looks like we got a lot of gods from this set that are not indestructible. So I can skip over that first step. I don't have to put the counter on my commander. I just go right to the last one and make my indestructible counter on my god. So, and in this situation, that might be extra good because your commander's an 8/8, right? Can't attack or block if you have less than 8 permanents in your graveyard. So this descend ability is interesting. It's sort of like Threshold, where you need 7 cards in your graveyard. This is sort of revisiting that, except there's a few variations here where you have the descend ability where it's acting like Threshold, where you just need those cards in your graveyard. But you also have the ability ones where you have to have stuff going into your graveyard. It's a combination of a bunch of different things that we've seen before, I think. They're doing it in different ways where it's like, okay, a static ability where you just have to have a certain amount of cards in your graveyard, but also it triggers when you have permanent cards in your graveyard, right? It's going in a lot of different directions. 2 blue and a black, draw a card, then discard a card. When you do, target player mills cards equal to the discarded card's mana value. Wow. So Training Grounds goes in this deck for sure. There's another deck where it's an auto include. So your ability is only going to cost blue and a black, and you're going to want to be doing it a lot. Just looting is always good. Just having a commander with loot on it is great, because I got something in my hand I don't need, chuck it in the garbage, draw something more useful, right? That's always nice to have on your commander. 4 is a lot to just do that. But you can also mill somebody. Obviously, you can mill yourself. That's the idea here is I got this 2-mana commander that can't attack or block unless I have 8 permanents in my graveyard. So now I want to self-mill, and I discard a couple things. And obviously, because you're discarding, you're going to want to discard a permanent. Discard that, 8-mana permanent. That goes into your graveyard. So I'm going to discard a Tidespout Tyrant. That is already a permanent going into my graveyard. And then I'm going to mill 8 cards as well myself, so I can get up to. So that's one way to go with this. Now I got a great big command. I mean, having that big commander is always, even if you don't plan on attacking with it, you just have an 8/8 commander that can block like crazy and is a threat. But also, like you could very easily build I think a pretty decent milling deck here, and you could do the mana value matters thing, like a really interesting card to put in here that I have talked about in the past, Grozoth. I wonder if you could do something here. This is obviously expensive, right? You want expensive cards in your hand or in your deck. So because whether you are milling yourself or your opponent, right? So now, whatever you've decided, I'm decided I want to use this just as a milling commander, and I'm milling my opponents. That's my win con. It can be your win con either way. Either way, you can attack with your commander or you can mill your opponents. Now what am I doing? Because what I want in my deck is some really expensive stuff, because my commander's ability depends on that. Grozoth is 9 mana, so that's a great thing to chuck in your graveyard. However, it also has that transmute ability, and this could be a great transmute commander. Black and blue are the transmute colors. I talk about transmute on my channel all the time because I think it's a great ability in the commander format. You can discard stuff into your graveyard, which you want, but then you go get more stuff that you want. And if you have a Grozoth, I can transmute it, and when it goes into I can discard it to my commander's ability, but I can also just chuck it in my graveyard, go get something else that's 9 mana, and then discard that to my commander's ability. So now I'm putting more stuff in my graveyard, but also Grozoth has this great ability where when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for any number of cards with mana value 9 and put them into your hand. So if you can cheat it into play, unfortunately, Flash is banned in the format. This is why I think different ban lists, because in CEDH it's banned. Essentially, it's banned in CEDH, but since there's no separate ban list, it's banned in Casual Commander as well, even though I don't think it's an issue in Casual Commander. I flash this guy in, I get that ETB, I fill my hand, right? I talked about this in a deck ideas video. I fill my hand with really expensive stuff, which for this commander I want, because then I can just discard and go nuts, right? So that's another thing, because you probably want a lot of really expensive things in your hand, or stuff in your deck to discard. I mean, funny enough, you could almost put a Yuriko in this deck, because you're going to have these really, really high mana value things that could work. You're doing sort of high mana value tribal here a little bit. So that's just another thing to think about, where, yeah, this commander seems like an obvious build around, but there's actually quite a bit to think about here with regards to it. All right, let's look at the blue land god. I'm not sure these are Ogres. I guess they're all Ogre. This one is Ogre Pacle. These names are killing me here. Deepest Epoch, 2 blue god, 4/3. Again, we got another god that doesn't have indestructible. Keep that in mind. 4/3 with flying. Whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains rebound. So this has already been getting some buzz. I saw some talk about this on my Discord. Obviously, again, this is a card that just goes in a ton of decks. All these Spellslinger decks are going to want this. Even the mono blue instant sorcery themes are going to want this. I guess it's only instant, but still, obviously you're casting a lot of instants. It's just free value. It's just like, okay, I'm already casting lots of instants in my deck. You know, I have a Talron deck. Every Talron deck wants this card, guaranteed, because 90% of your deck are instants. So you're just getting free value. Now, that being said, obviously rebound happens on your turn, right? Exile it as it resolves at the beginning of your upkeep. Wording here is important, of course. You may cast it from exile without paying its mana cost. So again, any cast from exile commanders are going to love this guy for that reason. The issue comes in with like the Talron deck or anything like that. Again, I think it's probably not included there anyway, but I cast a counter spell and that gains rebound, and on my upkeep, then what, right? It doesn't do anything. So that's where you're not going to get a ton of value, but you're still going to get, you know, rapid hybridization. On my upkeep, I get another rapid hybridization. Just great value. So why not? Of course, when it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under owner's control with 3 time counters on it. That's interesting. And of course, it's a land on the back, Temple of Cyclical Time. Tap, add a blue, remove a time counter from Temple of Cyclical Time. And I imagine I know what this other ability is going to be. 2 and a blue and tap. Transform it and activate only if it has no time counters on it and only as a sorcery. So yeah, you gotta, I mean, obviously you have to tap this land a few times to remove the time counters, but as we all know, there are other ways around that. They just did a bunch of stuff with time counters in Doctor Who. Might want to look there if you're thinking of building this guy to remove those time counters. It's very easy. I mean, again, power conduit, right? To go back to that, Ferropede, there's lots of ways to remove counters from stuff where you're not going to have to wait that long. And then also, you can just do the untapping thing. So I got a Fate Stitcher. I tap this to add mana. I mean, you're getting more mana also. I untap it with my Fate Stitcher, and then I tap it again. So not only am I getting more mana, and again, Fate Stitcher is a card that can go in any commander deck, and it's going to be very usable in a commander game. But also, I'm speeding up the process here, right? Of all the ones I've seen, this is by far the easiest to flip back over. So I definitely would not hesitate. You know, I mean, you're going to want to throw those cards in your deck. The power conduits, Fate Stitchers, whatever route you want to take with flipping your commander back over. But this is definitely, from all the ones I've seen, this is definitely the one that's the easiest to flip back, I think. And of course, the front is a pretty easy build. I mean, only instants, but that's not so bad, right? It doesn't work on your sorceries, but if you're actually building this decks, you're just going to pack it full of instants, right? And do any instant. I mean, the instant sorcery tribal will work here. Obviously, you're not going to be casting a lot of sorceries, but you're going to be casting the instants. So pretty easy build around. Just do whatever your favorites are, right? Moving on to Amalia Benavides Aguirre. Man, I'm hurting here. I know. I saw this one over the weekend and I was like, oh man, this is a really interesting commander. So white and a black, Vampire Scout 2/2. Ward, pay 3 life. So not the best ward ever. In fact, it's almost the worst ward for any ward that is just paying life is not really. Like in a commander game, it's like, I'm going to path your commander. You're going to pay the 3 life? Oh, you know, like unless they only have 3 life left, of course they're going to pay it, right? Whatever. It's better than nothing. It's better than a kick in the nuts, right? Whenever you gain life. So we have another life gain commander in white and black. And as we all know, there's a ton of support there, right? So we already got lots of support in that theme. Whenever you gain life, Amalia Benavides Aguirre explores. Okay, so again, we're doing the huge explore theme in this set. So much. Then destroy all other creatures if its power is exactly 20. So that's funny. I will just say, I mean, there's a couple of things to talk about here. First of all, as I say all the time, whenever you gain life is the instances of gaining life. That's where I want, like I talk about my Patron of the Kitsune deck, the best commander for I want those life gain triggers. And you could very easily throw Patron of the Kitsune in here because whenever any creature attacks, yours or your opponent's, you get the trigger. Your opponent attacks you with 6 creatures, you're going to get 6 life gain. This is your commander's going to trigger 6 times. Like, hey, you want like that card really is great for the life gain triggers, and it probably would be a good fit here. You throw it down, and your opponent, you want to attack me with 6 creatures, go nuts. I'm going to gain 6 life, but also I'm going to get 6 triggers on my commander, and I'm going to dig 6 deep into my deck. I'm exploring, so I can put lands into my hand. I can put stuff in my graveyard. Again, you can, whenever you're doing the exploring thing, there's a lot you can build around there. But of course, you're putting counters on your commander, which is what is going to get you eventually to the 20. Now, are you actually going to get to 20 that way? I don't know. Maybe if I got a Patron of the Kitsune in play and I got a Soul Warden in play, Leon and Elder's a great one. If you, again, that's the Soul Warden for artifacts, which In today's meta in Commander, with all the treasure tokens and the clue tokens and the food tokens, man, Leonin Elder is almost better than a Soul Warden for getting those life gain triggers. So I've mentioned that one before on my channel. I'll mention it again. Again, if you want those instances, right? So my opponent has a Dockside Extortionist enter the battlefield and makes 12 treasure tokens. My Leonin Elder gets me 12. I mean, it gets me 12 life, but it also gets me 12 triggers for my commander. So I might get to that 20 a lot quicker, right? I'll just throw a Hatred, which is going to be an auto include. That's the first one I think of. Hatred is the best card for this deck because, of course, because you're gaining life, you don't care about the pay life, right? It's like, oh, I'm gaining life like crazy, so what do I care? And that's the best way to get your commander's power to exactly 20. I mean, it's 5 mana, but, you know, you have to wait for the trigger here, obviously, right? So this is not going to be just, I make my commander's power 20 and not destroy all other creatures. No. It only happens when you gain life, when this triggers. Hatred is essentially going to be a board wipe in this deck. It's going to be an instant speed board wipe. So you're just going to have to time it appropriately because your commander's power has to be exactly 20 when this ability resolves. So likely you're going to want to pay like 18, 17, 16 life, whatever's going to get you exactly to 20, right? But Hatred for sure is going to be a great fit in this deck. Really interesting commander. It'll be funny to see how hard it is to actually get to that 20. All right, let's end off with a non-legendary creature here. This is not a commander. It is a card that is certainly going to get played in the format a lot, though, I think. Chamil, the Inner Sun. 6 mana, legendary artifact, spells you control can't be countered, and at the beginning of your end step, discover 5, which of course means exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value 5 or less. Cast it without paying its mana cost or put into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. And as you know, myself and a lot of people have already pointed out, it's essentially a better Cascade, I think it is, because I get that card on my end step, and again, this is worst case scenario draw card on your end step. Right. So this is worst case scenario. My spells can't be countered and I get to draw on my end step, which is not super great for 6 mana, but it's pretty good. Obviously, although I can also maybe cast something for free. I can just get some free 5 mana or value or less card off the top of my library as well. So it is better than that. This card very much reminds me of the Immortal Sun, which for me was an auto include in all my decks. I talked about that in my, artifacts that I don't play anymore because I don't have that in any decks anymore. But when it first came out, I fell in love with it. It's very good stuffy where it's just like, okay, this doesn't, the Immortal Sun doesn't really necessarily fit in a whole lot of decks. It's just giving you a whole bunch of stuff that every deck wants. Your spells are cheaper, you get the Anthem effect, drawing extra cards. It's good in every deck. And for that reason, it can fit in every deck. And for that reason, it was really, really popular in the format for a while and became really, really expensive for a while. This feels very samey, where 6 mana legendary artifact also. It's also a sun, so I don't know, a lot of coincidences there. But every deck doesn't want their stuff to be countered, right? Some people like it more than others. Some people, got a lot of people out there that are just putting Cavern of Souls and decks cards like that in all their decks because their play group likes to play a lot of counter spells. They just really hate their stuff being countered. A lot of people like that. Like for me, one of the reasons the Immortal Sun went in all my decks is because I hated Planeswalkers and I played against them a lot. So when I saw that ability, I was like, oh, it's going in all my decks. So the people out there that are like that just really hate having their stuff countered, might start shoehorning this into all their decks, and then you get that Discover 5 on your end step as well. So it just reminds me of that, where it's tough to say, is this going to be a card that a lot of people are going to be like, oh, God, that's got to go in my deck? Again, the end step Discover 5 is good. You're casting something from exile. So again, any deck that wants casts from exile or casts from anywhere other than your hand, this would be a good one to throw in there. Other than that, it's essentially get some free value on your end step and your stuff can't get countered. To be entirely honest, I think I would probably put the Immortal Sun in a deck over this because I think I'm getting more out of it. And again, unless you specifically really hate having your stuff countered, or you got the guy with the tall run deck in your play group, right? That kind of stuff. I think a lot of those people might go after this. How many people are going to be playing this? It's interesting to, I'm curious to see if people are getting really excited about this card or not. It's a tough one to evaluate for sure. All right, that is it. That is all. A few more cards coming out in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I'm starting to do my lists already of cards that I think are going to be going in all the commander decks, the best commanders, all of that, which will be coming out probably later in the week or next week, depending on when all the spoilers are done. Let me know what you think of these new cards coming out. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.